We, excuse me, we are on the record at the beginning of media number 1, volume 2. My name is contracted by Hahn and Bowersock. Please begin.
We're on the record at 9:04 a.m. on July 13th, 2017. I'm Jessica Chan, and with me are Rahul Kolekar, Monique Winkler, Michael Foley, Jason Habermeyer, and not yet with us is Mark Katz, but we are officers of the Commission for the purposes of this proceeding. We are today resuming the examination of Elizabeth Holmes, which was adjourned on July 11th, 2017. Would counsel please identify themselves?
Stephen Neal, Cooley LLP, on behalf of Elizabeth Holmes.
John Dwyer, also of Cooley.
David Taylor of Theranos, on behalf of Theranos.
Chris Davies from Wilmer.
Bill McLucas, Wilmer.
Allie Leeper, Cooley.
Testimony today is pursuant to a commission subpoena, which has previously been marked as Exhibit 191. Ms. Holmes, do you understand that you remain under oath?
I do.
Let the record reflect that a copy of the formal order of investigation in this matter, as supplemented, will be available for examination during the course of this proceeding. So before we get started, I wanted to give to you what was previously marked as Theranos Exhibits 191 to 200. I'll give these all to you. If you could just take a quick look and just let me know if you recall that we went through these exhibits earlier in your testimony on Tuesday.
Just for the benefit of counsel, we just have to remark because of a numbering error, so.
Thank you.
Do those exhibits look right to you?
I think so.
Okay, thank you. So, as Mr. Kolekar just explained, there was a numbering issue in our exhibits, so we do need to remark these exhibits. So I'm just going to do this in front
Do
of
you
you.
need to remark each of them?
Yes, just the first 10. So let the record show that I am marking what was previously marked as Theranos Exhibit 191 as new Exhibit 209. And that back to you. And I'm marking what was previously marked as Theranos Exhibit 192 as new Exhibit 210. I'm marking what was previously marked as Exhibit 193 as 211. I'm marking what was previously marked as Exhibit 194 as Exhibit 212. I'm marking what was previously marked as Theranos Exhibit 195 as Exhibit 213. I'm marking what was previously marked as Theranos Exhibit 196 as Exhibit 214. I'm marking what was previously marked as Theranos Exhibit 197 as Exhibit 215. I'm marking what was previously marked as Exhibit 198 as Exhibit 216. Excuse me. I'm marking what was previously marked as Theranos Exhibit 199 as Exhibit 217. And I'm marking what was previously marked as Theranos Exhibit 200 as Exhibit 218. And then just to take back exhibit, this is new exhibit 209. Ms. Holmes, do you understand that you are appearing here today pursuant to commission subpoena, which is now Theranos Exhibit 209?
I do.
Thank you. Counsel, do you have any questions? Okay. All right, so these will be here just in case we need to go back.
Here, I'll put it over.
Thank you. So when we left off on Tuesday, we were talking about Theranos' relationship with Walgreens. Do you recall that?
I do.
Okay. I'm handing to you what has been previously marked as Theranos Exhibit 50. Exhibit 50 purports to be a June 25th, 2012 email from, and with a copy to the subject line is meeting with starting dates number WAG-TH-00002493. And there are a number of attachments. The first attachment, it has Bates number ending 2494. The second attachment has Bates number ending 2499. And the third attachment has Bates number ending 2500. Have you seen Exhibit 218 before? I'm sorry, have you seen Exhibit 50 before?
I don't think the email, I recognize one of the attachments as our CLIA certificate, which I've seen before. I'm not sure about the meeting minutes in this list of CPT codes.
Okay. So if you turn to the email on 2493, it's an email from, do you understand what his role was at Walgreens?
Generally, yes.
What was his role?
It began, I believe, as part of it, and then I understand he got involved in medical affairs and general innovation initiatives for Walgreens.
And you were in discussions and was part of the Walgreens team that you were in discussions with pertaining to the Theranos-Walgreens relationship, right?
For a period of time, yes.
Okay. So it looks like he's sending some minutes from a meeting that took place Thursday and Friday. And so if you turn to the first attachment, these are the meeting minutes. The attendees here appear to be Elizabeth and Sunny. So did you attend this meeting on June 22nd and June 23rd of 2012?
I don't remember it, but I don't have reason to doubt the document.
Okay. And if you would turn to 2495, which is the second page of the attachment, you'll see in the middle of the page, the second bullet point says contract terms and timing. And then there are 4 diligence items in 30 days. Do you see that?
I do.
One of those items is the test menu. Theranos will provide Walgreens with a copy of the test menu incorporated as Schedule J and operations manual that the Theranos trained Walgreens technician will utilize during the PSC. Do you understand PSC to be Patient Service Center?
I do.
Okay. And then it goes on to say they gave us a clean copy of the test menu and they has it estimates approximately 600 tests. So if you then turn to the last attachment, this appears to be a test menu. Do you see that? Do you recognize this test menu?
I generally recognize that we had files that were like this with CPT codes. I don't know necessarily this one specifically, but I've seen documents like this before.
Did you give this test menu to the Walgreens team during that meeting or after that meeting?
I don't know.
Do you know if Sunny Balwani gave this test menu to the team after that meeting or during the meeting?
I don't. I wouldn't be surprised if we did, but I don't know for sure.
So there appear to be pages and pages of tests here. Could Theranos' TSPU perform all of these tests at this time in June 2012?
So I think there's two parts to that, which we were talking a little bit about the day before yesterday. The first is the architecture of the system, and we were very focused on capability in terms of the device itself or the platform with our small sample methods being able to perform this range of tests. There were additionally a number of these for which we had already developed assay development and validation reports, which I can recognize on this list.
So your testimony is that Theranos had developed all of these tests, or at least assay development, or all of these tests were in assay development phase at this time in June 2012?
I don't know if all of them were. I know that at least a subset of them were, or had development reports associated with them at that time.
Did you tell any of the attendees at this meeting that that was the case, that all of these tests were actually in assay development mode and had not actually been transferred to the TSPU yet?
I don't know. I also note that this is now in the time of the clinical lab, and based on the email you just showed me, I think we were talking at that point about the lab being able to handle a whole set of tests, so I don't know that we were even specifically talking about all of these being on fingerstick.
Okay, you can put that aside. Did you participate in a series of meetings in the summer and fall of 2013 to advance the Walgreens relationship?
I can't sit here now and remember specific meetings, but I'm sure I was at a high level engaged with Walgreens leadership during that time.
In the summer and fall of 2013, would that have been around the time that Theranos had developed or modified its commercially available machines in order to test smaller samples?
So my understanding is...
What was the time again?
Summer and fall of 2013.
My understanding is that in the fall, in that period is when we implemented our small sample volume chemistries on those platforms.
Okay, do you remember when that was? What month in 2013?
I don't.
If I told you it was around sometime in July of 2013, would that seem about right to you?
I'm not sure. My memory is that the first LDTs were coming up in the lab later, very, very close to launch, but it's possible that there was work toward it ongoing at July.
Okay.
Sorry, when do you remember the LDTs coming online?
My memory is that it was right before we actually began serving patients. Many of those validation reports were right before the first patients were coming in.
Did you discuss with Walgreens some of those throughput issues that you described earlier in your testimony during those meetings in summer and fall of 2013?
My memory is that at the time we invented the nanotainer, at that time we discussed the invention of the nanotainer and its ability to work with what we talked about as high throughput testing methods for our small sample assays in phase 1, and then focus on the device in phase 2.
So you developed the nanotainer in order to be used with the modified protocols on the commercially available platforms?
I don't know if we knew exactly at the time we developed the nanotainer what hardware the tests would run on, but the concept was that then a lot of samples could be collected from a lot of different locations and sent to one place to all be run at the same time in a high volume type of way.
But it sounds like you recall having developed the nanotainer around the same time that Theranos was looking into potentially modifying these commercially available machines. Is that right?
No, I think the nanotainer development happened much earlier when we shifted our business model with Walgreens from being focused on the TSPU at the store 2 being focused on a phase 1, phase 2 type relationship that started with centralized labs.
Okay, so when did you develop the nanotuner?
Yeah, we were talking about this the day before yesterday. I don't know specifically. I believe that it would have been around the time or shortly after the initial CLIA certification as a centralized lab, but I don't know.
Okay, so I asked you a question about whether you discussed the throughput issues that you had testified to earlier with Walgreens.
Yep.
Did you discuss those issues with them?
My memory is that I talked about it in the context of the nanotainer invention prior to 2013, and that the nanotainer model would facilitate testing in a high volume way in a centralized lab, and we then later picked what hardware platforms to implement our chemistries on.
Okay, but did you actually talk to them about some of the issues you were experiencing with the fact that the TSPU at that time could not conduct the same number of tests that you would need to conduct in order to receive a number of samples from patient service centers? Did you discuss that point with them?
The TSPU could only handle one sample at a time?
Yes.
I'm not sure. I can't remember a specific conversation. I don't know.
Did you ever discuss with them the fact that Theranos was in the process or had developed a solution to this throughput problem, or the fact that the TSPU could only perform testing on one sample at a time?
It's my understanding that part of our ongoing communications with them were around the fact that we were developing capacity to be able to handle large numbers of samples at a time. I don't know what details were discussed in that context.
How'd you gain that understanding?
I have memory that one of the metrics that they were looking at for moving beyond what they had initially referred to as a pilot stage was our throughput capability, how many samples we could handle in our labs. And I know that that was important to them.
But you don't know, I guess, if I understand your testimony, you don't know whether, the Theranos team communicating more directly with Walgreens disclosed Theranos' solution to the throughput issue.
I don't. Yeah.
So you also don't know whether you or anyone else at Theranos would have disclosed to Walgreens that Theranos was using commercially available machines and modifying the protocols on them?
I don't. I mean, we generally considered that implementation of our chemistries to be trade secret, and we filed non-public patent applications on certain parts of it. So I wouldn't expect that we would have gotten into detail on that. I thought that we had talked about it as ways we could implement our chemistries in high throughput fashion in the lab. I don't know the extent to which anything further than that was discussed with them.
But why wouldn't you tell Walgreens? I mean, Walgreens was Theranos' most important business partner at the time. Don't you think that Walgreens would have wanted to know what device you were using to process these samples?
It was my understanding that they were very interested in the TSPU for phase 2. I am not aware that they were very focused on what hardware that we were using in phase 1 at that time. We talked to them in general about how we were operating our labs, but there were not specific conversations that I'm aware of what the hardware platform was in phase 1.
But at the time that you were marketing Theranos' technology to Walgreens in 2010,
yeah.
Weren't the two parties envisioning that the TSPU would be running the tests?
In the stores, yes, and we were. Through 2015, when we got our first FDA clearance on the TSPU, our thought, even going into that year, was that we were going to start putting those TSPUs in the store. That was the hardware focus for Walgreens.
So why wouldn't it be important, though, to let them know, just so you know, the TSPU is not going to be the device that's going to be performing most of the tests. It's actually going to be this modified commercially available machine.
Again, my understanding is that we conveyed to them when we invented the nanotainer that we would be shifting to a model in which phase 1 was the nanotainer and the chemistries, small sample chemistries, and phase 2 would be the TSPU. We then also began adding commercial equipment for doing traditional venipuncture testing. And it's my understanding they were aware that the lab in phase 1 was doing a lot of different things to be able to accommodate the business model of phase 1, which was foot traffic and low-cost testing and a better patient experience, including small samples.
So you said a couple things I just want to follow up on.
Yeah.
You mentioned that it was your understanding that they understood phase one was about implementing Theranos chemistries. Did you ever use that language with them, implementing Theranos chemistries in connection with phase one?
I think so.
What was the context?
My memory is the first time is when we were talking about how to change the business model and the creation of the idea of phase one and phase two. And at that time, as we discussed in our prior meeting, the purpose of the nanotainer was to be able to run a lot of samples at the same time. And so the point we were trying to make is if the value to the patient is that they get their collection on a finger stick, they don't care whether it's processed on a device at the store or in a high throughput way in the lab. And so we could develop this nanotainer product to allow the samples to be processed in a high throughput way and then use the device in phase two in the lab. And I believe that was what generally led to the establishment of phase one and phase two.
Do you recall anyone at Walgreens that you used that language with?
So I thought that all of the conversations around the invention of the nanotainer, this was part of that discussion. I don't know who specifically was in those meetings because it was many years ago, but I believe that that was generally how we described the phase one, phase two model to Walgreens and to others.
You also, in an answer to an earlier question, described sort of the architecture of the 4 Series mini lab as something that was capable of performing that test menu we just looked at.
Yes.
Did you ever use that language, the architecture of the TSPU or the mini lab, in connection with any discussions with Walgreens?
I don't know if I used that word. I know that part of the Hopkins visit was, as I understood it, essentially evaluating that because they were looking at, is this truly differentiated from other point of care technology? And whether the word robotics or architecture or some other word was used, that was, I believe, what they saw as differentiating Theranos and why Walgreens was interested in partnering with us.
So just so I understand that, you understood Hopkins' evaluation to focus on the, whether it's, we call it the architecture or the robotics, whatever, the mechanism of the point of care device as the focus of their evaluation. Is that fair?
I'm sure there were other things, and I know Walgreens had multiple interactions with them. My understanding was that one of the things they were particularly focused on was, is this a platform that is capable of running any combination of tests, in so many words, given the way it's designed, essentially.
Do you recall performing demonstrations for a number of Walgreens executives during this time frame, summer to fall of 2013?
I don't have specific memory of them, but I'm sure there were multiple interactions. I know I mentioned that we sent a TSPU to Walgreens in Chicago for them to use at their facility as well. I don't know if that was in 2013 or at a different period of time.
Do you recall conducting these technology demonstrations in Theranos' office during this time frame?
Again, I don't have memory of specific demonstrations during that time.
But you do recall that there were demonstrations that were done for Walgreens, correct?
I don't recall specific ones. I know that Walgreens is a partner for whom we would have done demonstrations.
What was your understanding as to the purpose of those demonstrations?
I think, as we were discussing before, it varied based on the audience that was there and what they were interested in seeing. I know at certain periods of time they were interested in seeing the software we were working to build. At other instances, like with the TSPU, they were interested in seeing the TSPU. Over time, a lot of the focus became understanding the retail operation itself, what collection would be like in store, what the experience would be like in store, and trying to replicate that.
Wasn't part of the reason why they wanted to see a technology demonstration also because they wanted to just see for themselves that Theranos' technology worked and it could perform the blood test that Theranos said it could?
I don't know.
You don't know that Walgreens would have wanted to know whether or not your technology worked?
I know that that's why they had us go to Hopkins, and they had Hopkins look at it, and I believe look at a number of different inputs that Walgreens was getting on due diligence on Theranos. I don't know what they were thinking when they came to our site in terms of what they were looking for in a specific instance.
So, in the I guess in the summer fall 2013 time frame,
Yeah.
if the focus of is it fair to say that the focus from Theranos' side was on phase 1 with respect to Walgreens at that time?
Yes.
Would there be any reason to send Walgreens a TSPU in 2013 if that wasn't part of phase 1 and not the current focus on Theranos' side?
So again, I don't know if it was in 2013. It may have been before then, but as I look back on that time frame, what's really important to remember is we really believed that we were going to get a large number of tests into the FDA on the TSPU and cleared and moved to phase 2 very quickly. So yes, we were operating in phase 1, but we thought phase 2 is the future of the business. This is where we're going. This is what we're going to do. And we thought, based on the assays that we had, that we were really close to it. Right?
I guess did you ever explain whenever the machine was sent to Walgreens that that it was more relevant to the phase 2 context of the relationship?
I understood it was explicit that this is for phase 2. You're going to process a single patient sample at a time, I thought that had been conveyed well at that time.
You thought? Did you think you had conveyed that well to Walgreens at the time?
So I was only in meetings with some of their higher level decision makers. I understood from those meetings that, at least I thought I had conveyed that the TSPU was for phase 2, yes. I know now that there's been a lot of confusion about this, and I've tried to spend a lot of time thinking about how could we have done this better, but at those times I thought that was understood.
During phase 2, was there going to be a slowdown in the throughput of tests?
It's a good question. I don't know. I think part of the concept was that there would be specific. I don't know. I think we thought that if you were trying to get 10 patients a day in the store, if that was the target, that you would be able to handle 10 patients a day in the store on the mini lab. There would be potential issues if a lot of them came at the same time, but I don't think we ever thought that there was necessarily going to be a slowdown.
Was 10 patients a day your target in the 2013-2014 time period for Walgreens?
It's the number that I had in my head is when we started out what they thought would be a success. I know certainly over time and as we moved toward more of a venipuncture model, venous draws for phase 1, that we started thinking, how high can we get this number?
I guess when did that, in your mind, shift? When you started thinking more about a venipuncture model?
I don't know specifically. I believe it was toward either the end of 14 or early 15, but I could be wrong. I'm speculating.
Did you ever at any point communicate to Walgreens that you were, I guess, making this transition in your mind from thinking about the TSPU to more of a venipuncture model for testing?
Well, again, sorry if I didn't say this well. It was my understanding that the TSPU was always about phase 2. Venipuncture was an alternative to nanotainer for phase 1. And I believe that we did have conversations with Walgreens, especially as we began discussing what we called a rental model with the service centers in the stores about the importance of venipuncture. I know also when we moved to all Theranos labor, which as a startup that meant we were hiring hundreds of phlebotomists who were certified to draw blood, that there was explicit discussion about venipuncture, and in fact said to me at one point that maybe we could get the pharmacists to do the venipuncture because a lot of them had already been certified in doing venipuncture based on their pharmacy training. So yes, there was discussion about venipuncture.
Sure, I guess But I understood you earlier to say that, that sort of the value proposition earlier on was the finger. The patient doesn't care about their experience if they go into the store and get the finger stick. It doesn't matter what device it gets tested on, right?
Yes.
So I guess when did that consideration become, I guess, less important to you when analyzing the phase 1 Walgreens relationship?
So again, it's my understanding it was over time. I think the ability to get a large number of people getting only finger stick depended on what the order was. And so to get certain types of physician practices, you needed insurance contracts because the insurance contract would allow the physician to send the patient to you. And for the test menu we had to get those physician contracts, we needed contracts with the insurance companies. And the insurance companies essentially said what we care about is cost and an end-to-end menu. So as we got more experience trying to get insurance contracts, we understood that the most important thing in phase 1 was the test menu and the price, and that in large part drove the move to venipuncture.
So is your testimony then today that Walgreens was aware that Theranos was moving away from smaller samples and finger stick draws to venipuncture?
I can't sit here and say what Walgreens was aware of. I can say what I thought we had communicated, and I had communicated in the interactions that we had. I thought that we'd communicated that first we were focused on small samples, but that over time the real value to Walgreens was foot traffic, and therefore venipuncture made sense. I think they agreed with it based on the fact they've now partnered with LabCorp to do just that, but I don't know what they were aware of or not.
So you keep saying that you thought that you had conveyed this to them. Do you think that you conveyed it, or do you know that you conveyed it?
The conversations, this is many years ago, and I can't sit here and say I know within this meeting that I said this because I don't remember the meetings well enough, but I know what the purpose of the invention of the nanotainer was, and then what the purpose of building, for example, a venipuncture-based lab in Arizona was. And I really believe that Walgreens understood that at that time, because we were changing our entire business model, getting away from being a technology company for them. And that's one of the areas in which we and I made a lot of mistakes, was in doing that. And it was because we were trying to make that partnership successful.
Okay, so you don't know whether you did convey that to Walgreens then?
I can't sit here and recall specific conversations and specific words.
So you just mentioned something that I think is interesting to me. This idea that once it became clear to you through the insurance contracts and working with doctors' offices that that getting the full menu was important. At that point in time, essentially, your company is just turning into a lab services company. Is that fair?
Yes, it is.
And it moved away from its model of sort of the droplets of blood being a differentiator, right?
In some ways, again, all the time we were working toward getting the TSPU into the FDA and cleared for phase 2, right? So phase 1 is you're trying to get market share, essentially create a channel, and then come in with this technology in phase 2.
Sure. I guess I understand that, but it seems like at that point in time, the phase 1 and phase 2 are somewhat on divergent paths. I mean, you're trying to gain market share, but with a technology that is pretty different from what you're considering in phase 2. In your mind, how are you going to bridge that gap?
Yeah, so if you look at our mission as a company, it's access to health information. So access to us, what we began to understand, if you look at a lot of the customer feedback, it was about cost. People couldn't afford lab testing, and we were offering low-cost lab testing. And so cost, convenience, the experience, that was all part of what we were building in phase 1. Still with venipuncture, we were trying to do smaller samples, we were using butterfly needles, we were trying to invest in technology, which I can talk about if it's relevant, to make that total draw still smaller. And then as fast as we could get to phase 2 for fingerstick and even smaller turnaround time ultimately was our plan.
But was your company making any money offering low-cost lab testing?
So, at the volumes we were at, no. It was my understanding that we believed we could if we hit volume, and we thought that the retail footprint and some of what we were doing on changing the law to allow consumers to order tests would create that volume, but we never got to that point.
And so was the decision on, how to price Theranos tests in a Walgreens purely based on capturing market share?
So at a high level, it was, going back to my example of the $4 lab test, right? We wanted to provide a technology business model in lab testing. So we believed that we would ultimately be able to make money, but what we tried to figure out is what is the lowest price that we could possibly charge so that we're still breaking even or getting a little bit of profit, but changing access for people. So it's kind of like Walmart versus Neiman Marcus in terms of the pricing and the business model. Right? Walmart is high volumes, really low margin.
Okay, so going back to the demonstrations then, did you instruct anyone at Theranos to move mini lab devices or the TSPU into the CLIA lab in order to, because you were preparing for a tour or a technology demonstration? Do you recall ever doing that?
Move them into the CLIA lab?
Yes.
I don't recall doing that. I mean, there were TSPUs in the CLIA lab running some tests, as we've discussed.
Okay, so you don't recall ever moving more devices into the CLIA lab for that purpose?
I don't think so. I mean, I can't sit here and say that we never did, but I can't sit here and recall a specific instance. I don't think so, but I don't know.
Do you recall a meeting that you had with Walgreens executives in July 2013 in which you conducted a technology demonstration?
I don't remember.
While she gets the document,
Yeah.
would there be any reason to move mini lab devices into either the CLIA lab or the R&D lab for the purposes of a tour?
I mean, I remember we were always really focused on protecting sort of areas where we had open devices or things we thought were trade secret. So it's possible that we decided, okay, we're going to bring people to one place, so anything we want to talk about, put there. I don't have specific memory of specific instances and can try to talk about any specific instances that you want to talk about.
Okay, so I'm handing to you what's been marked as Theranos Exhibit 219. Exhibit 219 purports to be a July 12, 2013 email with a copy to you, Elizabeth Holmes. The subject line is re-demo results for 7/11, and the starting dates number is THPFM 0000064613. And there are two attachments. The first has starting dates number 64618. And the second has starting dates number 64620. Have you seen Exhibit 219 before?
I don't recognize it, but I don't have any reason to doubt this email.
What is Exhibit 219?
It appears to be an exchange about demo results.
Did you receive and review Exhibit 219 on or about July 12, 2013?
I don't know.
So if you turn to the last page, or the second to last page in the email, which is the first email in the chain, you'll see there's an email from him. He's writing to you, and do you see that?
I do.
And he says, "Hi, Elizabeth. Attached, please find the 6 demo reports for today. All out-of-range values are in red font." And then he goes on to say, "Please note the following. Creatine has been removed for all reports as per suggestion." Do you see that?
Yes.
Then he goes on to say, "Vitamin D has been removed for all male health panels as per suggestion." Do you see that?
I do.
He goes on to say, "TT4 and TT3 has been removed for all thyroid panels as per suggestion." Do you see that?
I do.
And then he goes on to write, FT4 has also been removed from the thyroid panel in F2. Do you see that?
I do.
Did you understand this to mean that was removing certain results from test reports?
Yes.
What was your understanding as to why he did this?
Well, again, the clinical lab had not gone live at this point, so I mean, going back to my prior comment, my understanding generally is if anyone who was reviewing the data had a concern about the data, don't include it on the report.
And you said your understanding was that you shouldn't include it on the report. Where was that? What was that understanding based on?
My general understanding of the fact that if you have a result that you think might not be accurate, it's not a good process to report the result.
So had the lab gone live and you were
Yeah.
conducting patient testing and a patient was coming to you and they were coming to you for diagnostic testing, and so their physician had ordered a number of tests, including some of these like vitamin D and TT4 and TT3, and you had some questions about the results that came out of those tests, would it be appropriate for you to remove those tests from the report? Wouldn't the patient, I mean, the patient needs that for testing, right? Why would you be removing results from reports?
So again, I was not directly involved in this. The laboratory director would make that decision based on whatever the right thing to do in the lab is.
Who was the lab director at this time? This is July 2013.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if had started or.
Okay, so you're not sure if he was the lab director, but so who would have made that decision then to remove test results, if not him?
Again, the lab wasn't live at this time, so I don't know that we had all those processes and SOPs in place yet.
Did you instruct him to remove results from test reports?
I don't know if I specifically told them to do that. Again, it was my general understanding that if there was ever a concern about a result, you wouldn't report it.
Where did you gain that understanding from? Did somebody tell you that?
I don't know. I think it was just basic process that we wanted to make sure the results we were reporting were correct. And I don't know for demos like this that there were specific test orders even coming in. I think, I mean, this was in an R&D environment.
But if some of the results came back incorrect, how did you know that the results that you did report were correct?
I don't know. I'm not a laboratorian. I didn't oversee the labs. I trusted my team to make those decisions.
So who here were you trusting to make that decision?
In this case, if I was reviewing the data, I would defer to him on his interpretation of the data.
You're talking about?
Yes.
And what were his qualifications to do that?
Again, I speculated a little bit on what I thought his training was. I'm not completely sure, but my understanding was that he was qualified to become ultimately a lab director.
But at this point in time, what was your understanding of his qualifications to make this determination?
His background in statistics and data analysis.
His background in statistics and data analysis.
Yeah.
And you hired him for this position, correct?
No, we hired him many years before as a scientist and then promoted him up within our organization over time.
So you promoted him to this position?
We promoted him into product development, and ultimately Sunny decided to make him a lab director.
But here, as we're looking July 2013, he was in the role to make this decision because of you, correct?
I mean, again, I was the CEO of the company, so I take responsibility for this company. I did not, in this role, I did not directly oversee the labs, but I tried to pick people who I trusted to do this right. And
So who was overseeing at this time?
to the extent that he was engaged in anything in the clinical lab operations, was the ultimate decision maker at the time he became clinical lab director. I don't know when that was. And Sunny was overseeing anything associated with operations in the laboratory.
But I don't see Sunny or on this email.
Why didn't you include them on the email?
Again, it's July of 2013. I read this as a technology demo that was done in an R&D setting prior to the lab going live.
And I guess What was the difference in your mind between the importance of results in an R&D setting versus the importance of results in a CLIA setting?
I understand the results to be important across the board. I believe there was a different process in place once the lab went live for how decisions like this were made, based on the authority and discretion of the lab director.
Did you communicate any distinction to the Walgreens folks receiving these demonstrations that Theranos didn't have those SOPs in place at this time?
I don't know.
Did you tell anyone at Theranos to communicate that to these folks at Walgreens?
I believe that Walgreens understood the lab wasn't ready to go live yet because we hadn't gone live, and they were pushing us really hard to go live as soon as possible. So they certainly knew we weren't operational at that time. I don't know what else was discussed or what the circumstance of this demo, or, I mean, frankly, I don't even know if this was for Walgreens. I defer to you if you're saying it was.
Well, why don't you take a look at the attachments? So the attachments include lab reports for, and does that ring a bell to you? Do those two names sound familiar to you?
I generally recognize him. I don't recognize.
Who's-
I don't know.
You don't know whether he's a Walgreens executive or not?
I'm not sure. I think so, but I'm not sure.
So instead of removing the results entirely, why didn't you just instruct him to just include the results, but maybe either indicate that it's out of range or just indicate that they needed to redraw for those results? Why not go that route?
Again, I'm not a laboratorian. We thought the right thing to do, I believe, if there was a result that was incorrect, was not share the value. We thought that was not proper.
But you must have known that Walgreens would want to know that all of the tests that were being performed would be performed correctly. So why wouldn't you want to be as transparent as possible and let them know actually there were some issues with, it looks like, at least 6 results. So what's your answer to that?
Again, the lab was not even live at this point. I don't think they came in with specific test orders. I think that the team was picking tests to do and made the decision that if test results were wrong, they shouldn't be reported. I don't know anything further than that.
But isn't another reason why you wouldn't want to include any indication that there were questions about the results, that had you put something like an out-of-range result or needs redraw, that would raise questions with Walgreens?
I mean, I'm speculating, but my guess is that the bigger issue would be that if you potentially communicated something that there might be a medical issue with someone and there actually wasn't.
But you said this was for R&D purposes, right?
Yes.
So no one was going to be relying on the results of these tests anyway for medical treatment, right?
Correct.
So I guess why in an R&D setting would you apply the protocols that are used for clinical lab purposes?
We were trying to do the right thing. We were trying to report results that we believed in and not report results if we thought there was any issue. And if there was an issue, we would need to understand why. And I believed that our team was trying to do the right thing.
Is it fair to say that at this time, Theranos was trying to demonstrate to Walgreens that it was technologically capable of running tests in a lab setting?
I don't know what the circumstances of this demo were, so I would be speculating on that. I know that we were very focused on showcasing the fingerstick experience, on training their technicians, on creating the front end. We certainly had gone through the CLIA certification process and were very focused on trying to put the right infrastructure in place from a CLIA perspective on an ongoing basis as we led up to launch.
Sure. I guess just more basically, I mean, was it your understanding that if Walgreens didn't think that Theranos could run tests, it wouldn't allow Theranos to open its stores?
I mean, I don't know. We would be speculating. I know that Ultimately, we ended up with a all venipuncture model. Had we talked about doing that at this point, I don't know what that conversation would have been.
Was it important to you in the summer and fall of 2013 to demonstrate that Theranos could perform clinical lab testing on blood samples to Walgreens?
Of course, absolutely.
And so when did Theranos end up rolling its services out with Walgreens?
So I think the first patient in California was in October of 15, and the first one in Arizona was in November. I'm sorry, of 13, and the first one in Arizona was in November of 13.
Okay, so at the time of this technology demonstration, you're about 3 months away from going live in the patient setting. Did it concern you that a number of tests weren't working on Theranos' devices?
I know that we made mistakes in our clinical lab, and I picked people who I trusted and believed in to do the right thing here. I believed that as issues were raised, we were looking into them, doing root cause analysis and solving them. I believed that when our lab director signed off on validation reports, it meant that we were in good shape. And I know that we made so many mistakes on this front, but we were trying to take this forward, and at that time thought that we were doing the right thing.
Do you know if any of these issues were ever resolved? That the Theranos device was then able to test for creatinine and vitamin D and TT4 and TT3 and FT4. Do you know if
I believe
all
at least
of those,
some of
sorry,
those.
let me just finish my question.
I'm sorry.
Do you know if any of those issues were finally resolved?
I believe that at least a number of these were validated in the lab as LDTs later, yes.
On the TSPU?
I think so, some of them.
Which ones?
I think vitamin D was, and I think some of the thyroid markers. I don't know which ones specifically.
So you'll see that, we looked at a couple of the reports that are attached to this email. There's reports, and if you look in the, if you look on 64613, which is the first page of the email, it looks like getting ready to send these reports out. Did you ever tell that a number of the tests that were run on their blood samples were actually removed from the reports?
I don't know. Again, I don't remember interactions around this.
Okay, you can put that one aside. I'm handing to you what's been previously marked as Theranos Exhibit 63. Exhibit 63 is a letter agreement dated December 31st, 2013, titled Amended and Restated Theranos Master Services Agreement with beginning dates numbered WAG-TH-00000099. Have you seen Exhibit 63 before?
I think so.
What is Exhibit 63?
I believe it's the amendment to our agreement with Walgreens.
Did you receive and review Exhibit 63 on or about December 31st, 2013?
I don't know.
Okay. If you turn to 104, which is the last page of the agreement, is this your signature on the right?
Yes.
Okay. So do you believe that you would have received this on or about December 31st, 2013 and signed it on that date as well?
Yeah, I believe I signed it on that date.
So if you look at the second page of the agreement, which is 100, under number 1, national rollout, it says the parties shall work together to develop a forecast that details the anticipated rollout dates for Theranos services in individual U.S. states and territories. The parties are committed to taking all steps reasonably necessary to ensure a successful national rollout of the Theranos services. And you can go on and read the rest of the paragraph if you wish, but nowhere in this paragraph does it say that there is a binding agreement between the two parties to roll out nationally, is there?
I'm sorry, the question is, does this paragraph say whether there's a binding agreement to roll out nationally?
Yes.
Can you just read it for a second? No, this paragraph says that they're committed to taking all steps reasonably necessary to ensure a successful national rollout.
Are you aware of any contracts or agreements that would bind Walgreens to roll out Theranos services and wellness centers nationally?
My understanding was that this agreement, and even going back to our initial press release that said we were going to roll out nationally, that was the intent of this. And both of us had ways to get out of the contract if we decided it wasn't going well.
Okay, so what's the answer to my question? Are you aware of any contractual agreements between the two companies that would bind Walgreens to roll out nationally with Theranos?
Honestly, that was my interpretation of what this was.
What this is referring to.
This agreement, yes, this amendment was saying we're going to do this, we're going to go out nationally. I think they say later in here that they're going to build out a certain number of what they called gold spaces. I recognize that this language does not say this is a binding agreement to be national, but that was my understanding of the purpose of this amendment.
So if you turn to 101, there's a provision at small d. And it says, notwithstanding anything to the contrary, Theranos agrees that it shall not, without Walgreens' prior written consent, offer services or collect samples through CVS Caremark Corporation's Minute Clinics or their equivalent in exclusive Walgreens markets. In the event Theranos desires to utilize such clinics in non-exclusive Walgreens markets, it will inform Walgreens in advance and review their rationale for doing so, and consider reasonable alternatives that Walgreens may advance. So you understood from this that Theranos couldn't go out and enter into a contract with CVS without giving prior notice to Walgreens, right?
Yes.
And Theranos had to also consider reasonable alternatives if Walgreens offered reasonable alternatives to Theranos to rolling out with CVS, correct?
Yes.
Okay, why don't you turn the page to 102. Under 3, innovation fee. What did you understand as to the innovation fee discussions that were taking place between Walgreens and Theranos?
My understanding was that ultimately in this agreement, this money was paid essentially, as it says here, to be better prepared for national rollout and for essentially exclusivity to Walgreens.
Was Theranos asking Walgreens to accelerate the innovation fee payment?
I think we said to them that if they want us to roll out at the pace that they wanted us to roll out, that we were going to need to invest a lot and we needed capital to do that.
So what was your understanding as to the terms under which Theranos would earn the innovation fee, though? Did you have any understanding of that?
My understanding was that essentially we were earning it by being exclusive to them and by being compliant with the contract. I know there was a a lot of provisions in the agreement about targets that we were both setting for rollout.
Did you understand that in the 2012 amended master purchase agreement that Theranos wouldn't be earning the innovation fee unless it hit certain revenue targets?
I know the provision that you're talking about. I think we thought that when we moved to this agreement, we were earning it based on exclusivity.
And where does it say that you'd be earning it based on exclusivity?
I believe the section, I mean, what I had in my head was the section prior that talks about the exclusivity commitments from Theranos and the associated commitment from Walgreens.
So just so I understand that, by December 31st, 2013, it was your understanding that Theranos' retention of the innovation fee from Walgreens was based on exclusivity and not on revenue targets?
I don't know that we focused on the revenue targets provision in the 2012 agreement. After that, I'm not sure. I know to the extent I talked about it internally with Sunny, it was that this is money that we're earning for exclusivity.
So were you able to identify a portion of the contract that did away with the earning event being tied to revenue targets?
No.
So if you turn...
Sorry, I just want to make sure I understand. So at the end of 2013, in your mind, the innovation fee wasn't dependent on revenue targets with Walgreens?
I'm trying to remember whether we had any conversations about the revenue targets again after this agreement. I remember associating it mentally with exclusivity. I don't know. I don't know how we address that.
I guess in your mind at this time, how did you think Theranos was going to earn the innovation fee as of year-end 2013?
Honestly, what I have in my mind is that we thought we would earn it based on exclusivity to Walgreens.
What did that exclusivity in your mind provide? I mean, how is Theranos going to be exclusive with Walgreens?
Working only with them for some agreed period of time until we got permission from them to work with other retailers.
What was that period of time?
I don't remember it off the top of my head. I could look back at these and try to piece it back together.
So what was your understanding then as to when Theranos would be able to earn the innovation fee and count that as revenues?
Earned in a legal sense or an account?
Do you understand what my question is?
I don't know. What is your, if you could clarify?
So you just answered Mr. Kolikar's question, and you said exclusivity means that at a certain point in time, Theranos will have worked with Walgreens for long enough and not with another retailer, and at that point in time, Theranos would have earned the innovation fee.
Yeah, I mean...
Is that your answer?
My answer is that by committing to Walgreens that we would be exclusive to them, we were earning this money, and that was why it was being paid at the end of December, as opposed to based on all these later targets that we had previously put in place.
Okay, so at what point in time would the parties decide that Theranos would have earned it because Theranos had stayed true to the exclusivity rights that it had given to Walgreens?
It was my understanding, based on conversations with Sunny, and he was the one who was looking at this, that because we had amended this agreement, we as Theranos thought we'd earned it.
Through your conversations with Sunny?
Yes.
Did you have any independent conversations with Walgreens?
No.
In other words, is it fair to say that by the end of 2013, you understood the innovation fee to belong to Theranos unencumbered?
I did, because we'd committed to them that we would be exclusive to them, and that was how Sunny believed that the payment would be reflected.
Okay, if you turn the page to 103. under 7, additional equity rights. It says the parties agree that $50 million of the $70 million payment made by Walgreens pursuant to Section 3 above may be converted at Walgreens' option into equity on such terms as are made available to investors in Theranos' planned equity financing in the first quarter of 2014. The parties also agree that upon signing this agreement, Walgreens will receive an option to purchase up to $50 million in Theranos equity on the terms made available to investors who invested in the prior equity financing, e.g. at $15 per share. Did you understand this provision to provide that Walgreens would be given an option to purchase up to, or the option to convert about 50 of the $75 million accelerated innovation fee to equity, and then would also have an option for an additional $50 million in equity in Theranos?
Yes.
You testified earlier, you can put that one aside.
So let's take a break then. If we're done with that document, it's been a little over an hour.
Okay, let's take a really short break if you don't mind. So 5 minutes, does that work?
10.
Off the record at 10:10 a.m.
We are back on the record at 10:25.
Ms. Holmes, did you have any substantive conversations with the SEC staff during the break?
I did not.
So you testified earlier on Tuesday that you understood that venous drop percentage and patient traffic were important metrics for Walgreens in evaluating the relationship. Do you remember that?
I think so.
So,
I don't know if I said that venous drop percentage was an important metric. I certainly know that patient traffic is, or was.
Did you understand that venous drop percentage was important to Walgreens?
I understood that there was focus on it from certain people within Walgreens, and frankly not from others.
Who was it a focus for?
I believe some of the early team that had been focused on the the initial TSPU business model. And then over time, as the Boots leadership came in, it became, as I understand it, more about foot traffic.
So I guess prior to the Boots merger, did you understand that the venipuncture percentage was an important metric for Walgreens?
I know that I don't know if it was an important metric to them. I know that some of the lower level team members were interested in it over time.
I guess just who from the Walgreens team do you remember that being important to?
I don't know. I just remember Sunny talking about it.
I'm handing to you Winston Mark Fairness Exhibit 220. Exhibit 220 purports to be a May 6, 2014 email from Sunny Balwani to Elizabeth Holmes. Subject line is forward final deck with starting dates number THPFM 000-1558583 with an attachment with starting dates number. Currently we don't know what the dates number is, but I believe it's 1558584. Be in the next page. Have you seen Exhibit 220 before?
I'm not sure.
Is this the way it was produced to you guys? You know, I mean, do we know this is the attachment that's referred to in the email? You guys have a way of knowing that?
Yes.
How do we know that? Is that the way we turned it over to you, or?
This, it could be that some of the attachments might have come in a different format, maybe native. They were in native files, which is the reason why the date stamp isn't on it. If you have a problem with it, we can always
No, I don't have.
prepare another copy.
I'm just sort of curious to see whether your shirts.
We'll check during a break.
Okay.
You seen Exhibit 220 before?
I don't know.
Is this your email address at the top, eholmes@theranos.com?
It is.
Do you have any reason to believe that you didn't receive this on or about May 6, 2014?
I do not.
So you'll see in the email, there's a preceding email to Sunny Balwani. And he writes, attaches the final deck, and then Sunny Balwani then forwards it on to you. Do you know why Sunny Balwani forwarded it on to you?
I don't. I would assume it's an FYI.
Okay, so he's trying to keep you in the loop about the Walgreens relationship, right?
I think so.
Okay, so if you turn to the attachment, and the title is Diagnostic Testing, Fairness Partnership. If you look on page 4 of the presentation, I think you're on it already, the top says Diagnostic Testing Program Governance, and there are a number of names. Do you know who was a part of the Executive Steering Committee for Fairness?
I can see here that it says Sunny, and I believe that was correct.
Okay. Or were you aware that there was an Executive Steering Committee that was formed between
I was.
Walgreens and Fairness?
Yes.
And did you understand that they were convening on a regular basis to discuss the Walgreens-Theranos relationship?
I did.
Okay. So why don't you turn to page 6. And the title of that slide is Current Operations Metrics. Do you see that?
Yes.
And there's a table. One of the metrics here is average patients per store per day. And you see that in February 2014, it's at 0.8, but in May of 2014, it went up to 3.1. Do you see that?
I do.
So is that consistent with your understanding then that in May of 2014 that there were about 3 patients per day being seen in each store per day?
I didn't remember how many there were in May of 14, but I don't have reason to doubt this.
Okay, but it appears that you would have been aware of this in May of 2014, right?
I mean, probably generally.
Okay, and then if you move down to venous straws, it looks like the venous straw went from 43% in February 2014 to 39% in May of 2014. Do you see that? So it looks like the venous straw percentage didn't actually change that much. Do you see that?
I do.
Were you aware that the venous straw percentage in May of 2014 was 39% at the stores?
I don't know. I don't remember what I was aware of in May of 14.
Okay, but at the time that you received this, and you would have been aware from reviewing this that it was at 39%.
Honestly, I don't know that I reviewed this at the time. Sunny sent me a lot of documents, and I didn't always open them.
You didn't always open documents that Sunny sent to you?
I did not.
Was it your general practice to review the documents Sunny sent to you?
Sometimes. Sometimes he would just tell me what he thought was relevant that I needed to know.
I guess did you ever tell him to stop, forwarding information about the Walgreens relationship?
No, not at all.
Do you have any reason to believe that you didn't review this at the time in May 2014?
I don't remember reviewing it in May 2014, so I just don't know.
Do you remember the venous straw percentage for patient testing at Theranos Wellness Centers being around 40% during the entire period of the relationship?
I remember that when we responded to the Wall Street Journal article, I asked a team to calculate it, and they came back and used the number of about 60-something percentage on finger stick, so I knew it from that.
Okay, so you were generally aware it was something like 30 to 40% venous straw, correct?
Again, I don't know what exactly I was aware of at that time. I know that in 2015 I asked a team to go back and do analysis of it and got that number.
Okay, so why don't you turn to then the last page, on page 14. It's titled The Path Forward. And there are a number of bullet points, the first being operations improvement. Do you see that?
I do.
It says focus on venous draws reduction and reduce new patient check-in time to less than 8 minutes and achieve 15 patients per day per store. Was that consistent with your understanding that Walgreens was looking at a target of about 15 patients per day per store?
I thought prior to reading this that it was 10, but I don't doubt this.
Okay. Okay, we can put that one aside. So you also testified earlier that Theranos Wellness Centers were only ever opened in 41 stores. Do you remember that testimony?
At Walgreens.
At Walgreens?
Yes.
Do you know when that last store was opened?
I don't.
If I told you it was September of 2014, would that seem about right?
I actually don't know, but I don't doubt that.
You don't know when the last store was opened in Walgreens?
I don't.
This was Theranos' most important business relationship, and you have no idea when the last store was opened?
I genuinely don't remember it.
She didn't say she had no idea. You asked her, was it September? She said she wasn't sure.
I'm trying to tell you exactly what I remember and what I don't remember.
Do you have any reason to doubt that it was around September 2014?
No.
Weren't you aware by that time, and certainly by the end of 2014, that Walgreens would not agree to open any new stores for Theranos?
By the end of 14, no.
You weren't aware that Walgreens was having concerns over opening new stores and providing Theranos services in them?
I mean, I knew we were going back and forth on refining the model of the relationship, but I remember, I don't know if it was the end of 14 or early 15, engaging with amending and expanding our contract, potentially around a rental model.
I guess, was it your understanding that Walgreens wasn't going to open up any additional stores at that time absent some sort of amendment?
I don't know. I know there were a lot of discussions of continuing amendments, and I know that sometimes the models that we were following did not reflect the exact contracts that we had in place at the time. I don't know if I knew that there had to be an amendment. I don't think that was my understanding.
Oh, what do you mean by the models you were following didn't reflect the exact contracts?
For example, with Safeway, we moved to a CLIA certified lab model, even though the contract reflected a CLIA waiver model, and we never amended the contract. So we had partnerships in place where we were operating in a way that was not necessarily consistent with exactly what was in the contract.
Sure, I guess turning specifically to this time period of sort of the September 2014 through the end of 2014.
Yep.
Can you think of any ways in which Theranos was operating with Walgreens in a way that was not consistent with your understanding of the Walgreens contracts?
I don't know if we had worked out exactly as we were collecting funds from people at retail. I think Walgreens was collecting them. We hadn't yet created a system where they were reimbursing Theranos for the monies that they had collected. We figured we'd work that out over time. I don't know if we were following exactly the labor and staffing model in the agreement. We were doing different things. I think there was some instances in which Theranos was actually doing the labor for check-in, even though we contemplated that that would be Walgreens generally. I'm sure there's probably others.
I'm going to hand to you what's been marked Theranos Exhibit 221. Unfortunately, they are all loose leaf and not clipped. Maybe we can clip this one. Not possible. stressful, but
No worries.
you can try and keep this together. I'm handing to you what's been marked as Theranos Exhibit 221. Here are copies for the two of you.
Thank you.
Exhibit 221 purports to be an Excel file that includes a number of rows of font. The starting base number is TS-1036239. Have you seen Exhibit 221 before?
I think I've seen some of the content in it. I've never seen it like this.
I'll represent to you that this is the file that Theranos provided to the SEC pursuant to subpoena, which is supposed to reflect the text messages between you and Mr. Balwani on your Theranos issued cell phone.
Yep.
Do you have any reason to believe that this isn't a true collection of those text messages from your work cell phone?
No.
Okay. So if you turn to the page with Bates number 1036292.
621.
6292. Are you there?
I am.
Yours looks a little different from mine.
Maybe I'm
Are you on 6292?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was on the wrong page. Yep, got it.
Okay, so you'll see about 5 messages down from the top. There's an SMS message on November 19th, 2014, and it appears to be from Sunny Balwani to yourself. Is this Sunny Balwani's email address? Do you recognize it?
I think so.
Okay. And he says, we can't scale with WAG. And WAG, you understand, is Walgreens?
Yes.
Okay. And then in his next text message, he says, they are terrible and we need SWY and CVS. Do you understand SWY to be Safeway?
Yes.
And then you respond, it is time. Let's get SWY done this week. We can do it. And then Mr. Balwani responds, they told our team in WAG meeting that they don't intend to open more PSCs until July because we missed their IT integration deadline. Do you see that?
I do.
And PSCs, again, is patient service centers?
Yes.
So you were aware in November of 2014 that Walgreens wasn't looking to expand Theranos services to any other stores. Isn't that right?
I'm sitting here now reading this exchange. I don't think I would have taken that as definitive that we wouldn't be expanding. If we thought there was an issue, I would have called their CEO or president and said we need to expand.
So you didn't think reading this that there was an issue?
Clearly I thought there was an issue because we're talking about Safeway and CVS, but I wouldn't take a comment made in a WAG meeting as indicative that we wouldn't be expanding with Walgreens.
Okay. Did you do anything to contact anyone at Walgreens about this issue, the fact that they raised in a meeting that they wouldn't be looking to roll out Theranos services in any additional stores?
I don't know. I don't know.
So you don't remember contacting anyone at Walgreens about this issue at this time?
So I saw from the other document that you gave me that I believe was already involved at this time. I know I had fairly frequent interactions with him that were generally positive. I don't remember this text or remember what follow-up happened, but certainly, unless it was coming from a C-level executive, I wouldn't have taken it as indication that we weren't going to be expanding in our relationship. We would have tried to work through the issue.
So,
Did you agree with Sonny's assessment in November of 2014 that Walgreens was terrible?
Sonny uses very strong words to express things. I understood that he had been very frustrated with them for a long time. There were specific frustrations about the stores that we had and the fact that the rooms hadn't been built out. So I think just reading this now, interpreted as I agreed that we should start engaging with the other retail opportunities that we had. We always believed we were going to continue to work with Walgreens.
What were Sonny's other frustrations with Walgreens as of November 2014?
So the ones I remember are, we talked a little bit the other day about the store footprint being in locations where not a lot of people would come into the stores, so they weren't ideally suited for success in terms of foot traffic. We were supposed to have bathrooms in our locations, and there was a commitment around what was in the amendment around gold, quote-unquote, stores, and I don't know if any of them had been built out. There was also a commitment in that amendment to proceed, I think, with at least 3 geographies, and they hadn't proceeded with retail construction in those 3 geographies, which we had understood to be a commitment. So I think that was the basis of the frustration.
So by this time, did you have an understanding of why Walgreens hadn't expanded to those 3 geographies?
My memory is that Boots had come in and that they were looking at this again, and I think Boots had different thoughts about the contract and the relationship than Walgreens did, and that was driving a sort of re-review of this, which ultimately led to some of the discussions about formally amending the contract again.
And do you recall when Boots came in?
I don't.
So is your understanding that the Boots team wanted to sort of re-review the Walgreens-Theranos relationship to, I guess, reconsider how to roll out the stores?
I don't know whether they wanted to reconsider rolling out. I understand that they did re-review the relationship, and I don't know what they were particularly thinking in it. I think they were sort of reevaluating everything that the old Walgreens leadership had done.
And so that reevaluation, did you understand that that was happening around this time in late 2014?
I don't know when it happened.
So if you look back at that page, there's a text from Mr. Balwani, several lines down, that says, "Need CTN fixed, our root cause of issues." Do you see that? It's on the same date at 5/12.
Yes.
What did you understand him to mean by that?
I don't know.
And CTN, is that capillary tube and nanotuner?
Yes.
So you respond, he says, "I know seems like they are a mess," and you respond, "Yes." So it sounds like at that time you understood what he was talking about. You have no recollection of what he was talking about then?
I don't, and I'm not quite sure whether those 2 texts right back and back are referring to the same thing. They may be referring to some of the earlier texts.
Okay. Do you recall any issues with the capillary tube and nanotuner?
At this time?
At this time period? I don't know specifically at this time period. I know we were, on an ongoing basis, particularly focused on training of phlebotomists and trying to minimize the number of collections and redraws, and if you don't do it right, the sample gets what's called hemolyzed, which is messed up, and so there's a huge ongoing focus on that.
Okay. You can set that aside, which I understand might be difficult, but you need a rubber band or something. So earlier in your testimony, we also discussed that there was a time when Theranos and Walgreens started discussing the possibility of a rental model.
Yes.
Do you recall those discussions taking place around December 2014?
I don't. I don't know when they. I remember it as being on a sort of a period of time, but I don't know when it started.
Okay. handing to you what's been marked Theranos Exhibit 222. There's 2 copies there.
Great, thank you.
Exhibit 222 purports to be handwritten notes from December 10th, 2014, with starting dates number TS-0480486. Have you seen Exhibit 222 before?
Not like this, but it looks like these are my notes.
Is this your handwriting?
It is.
Okay. And up on the upper right corner, there's a date of December 10th, 2014. There's a time of, it looks like 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. And then there's a conference room and a number of people are listed under there. Do you think this was a meeting with Walgreens?
I do think it was a meeting with Walgreens. I don't think that is correct.
Which is not correct?
Well, at least the time and maybe not even the conference room and the date. I'm not completely sure whether this was at Theranos or somewhere else.
Briefly, could you just walk us through how your handwritten notes were treated by your assistants?
Yes. Sometimes they would prepare a letterhead for a meeting that had the date and the names and the time on it. Sometimes if we didn't have letterhead, we would use letterhead that had been previously produced for something else, and I would write on that. I would take notes and I would give it to them, and they were to scan those notes and put them on the CEO drive that we discussed.
Okay, so why don't I just mark another document for you? I'm going to hand to you also a document that's been previously marked as Theranos Exhibit 186. Exhibit 186 purports to be a December 9th, 2014 email to a number of individuals, including yourself, with a copy to, again, a number of individuals. Subject line is copy 8 o'clock a.m. PT, Walgreens Theranos meeting. And the Bates number is WAG-TH-0003745. Have you seen Exhibit 186 before?
I don't recognize it.
Okay, and you'll see in the to line, it was sent to eholmes@theranos.com. That's your email address, correct?
It is.
Do you have any reason to believe that you didn't receive this email, or it looks like a calendar invitation on or about December 9th, 2014?
No, I mean, calendar invitations automatically went to my assistant, so I never saw them coming in, but I don't doubt the email.
Okay, so when you would receive calendar invites, it wouldn't go to your inbox?
Correct.
They would go directly to your assistants?
Yes.
Okay, who is your assistant on the CC line? Is she on there?
She's not.
So where would this have gone to?
As I understand it, my Outlook is configured in such a way in which if a calendar invite comes into eHolmes, it shows up in the mailbox of my assistants, which is EAH office.
Okay, do you know who your assistant was at that time?
No. I think it started by this point, but I'm not sure.
Okay, so in any case, in the body of the calendar invitation, it says 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. PT. It's for a meeting on December 10th, 2014. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay, and then your meeting notes have roughly the same information, except that it says 10 p.m. instead of 10 a.m.
Yep,
Do
got
you have
it.
any reason to doubt that these notes were from the December 10th, 2014 meeting?
No.
Okay, so if you turn the page to page 2 of your notes, that's 487. You see at the top it says lab data, and then I can't read the word next to it. What is that?
I don't know. I'm guessing it might be phase, but I'm not
Phase.
sure.
Okay, and then underneath it says services and clinic, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then underneath again in bullet points it says venipuncture and 5 per day, do you see that?
Yes.
Did you, does this refresh your recollection that you would have been talking about venipuncture and 5 patients per day in Walgreens stores servicing, providing Theranos services during this time?
It doesn't refresh my recollection, but I recognize the words on the page.
So halfway down the page, it says, there's a bullet point and it says rental AGMT model. I assume AGMT is agreement. Is that right?
I'm sorry, where are you?
Halfway down the page.
Right here.
Yes.
Do you see that?
Yes.
Is AGMT agreement?
Yes.
So does it look like you were discussing with Walgreens executives the possibility of a rental agreement model during
Yes.
this meeting? Okay. And then it goes on to say incentive early years rental AGM agreement. Incentives both winning. What were you referring to there when you wrote that?
I don't know.
Did you view the rental agreement as with Walgreens as something that can be beneficial to both parties?
Absolutely.
Why?
Because we understood ultimately from the experience we'd had by then that foot traffic was the most important metric to Walgreens, and that for Theranos, we could have control over the space and ensure a good experience. So some of the frustrations that had existed in the store model, we could resolve because we'd be owning the space completely.
Okay, so you can put that aside. Did you tell prospective investors at this time, so this was December 2014, that Walgreens and Theranos were considering modifying the contract to enter into more of a rental agreement model?
I don't remember specific conversations, but I wouldn't be surprised if we did. We were excited and proud of this. We thought this was going to be the way that we would scale ultimately.
Okay, so, but you don't remember having any conversations with prospective investors about
I
this?
don't.
You mentioned a minute ago that Sunny had some frustrations around the Walgreens relationship around that late 2014 time period. Did you ever share any of those frustrations with prospective investors?
I don't know because I don't remember specific discussions. I wouldn't be surprised if we did, because people would ask, what's limiting. I'm assuming people would want to know why we were in the store footprint that we were and what was going to drive growth, and therefore that would have been a likely thing to discuss, but I don't have memory of specific discussions.
Do you recall Sunny ever sharing his frustrations with Walgreens to any prospective investors in any meetings you attended?
Again, I can't remember specific conversations, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did.
So if the parties chose to restructure the relationships so it was more of a rental model, would that have had any impact on the timing of the rollout of Theranos services to Walgreens stores?
I'm sure it would have impacted, but I don't know whether it would have made it better or worse.
In what way?
I don't understand what was controlling the rollout pace on the Walgreens side, and I don't know exactly how fast we thought we could build out these locations if we were building them out ourselves.
Okay, but certainly it would have taken a few months to get things rolling and to open another wellness center in Walgreens stores.
I don't know. It depends on whether we were using, for example, their clinic spaces that had already been built out or not.
Okay. You can put that one aside. So I want to change gears and now start talking about Theranos' relationship with Safeway. Why was Theranos interested in entering into a contract with Safeway?
At a high level, it was another vehicle for building a retail footprint, and with our focus on people's access to health information, we thought it could be really meaningful to help people start linking diet to their health data with the software applications that we wanted to build.
Okay, and did you have any understanding as to why Safeway wanted to enter into a relationship with Theranos?
My understanding is that they shared that vision and also were interested in ways to expand and differentiate their pharmacy.
Okay, and in what way would they be able to differentiate their pharmacy if they partnered with you?
If people were able to access information about their health, it could inform the decisions about what foods they bought. And that data could be powerful for people who are dealing with things like prediabetes or diabetes that are diet related.
So was what the parties were discussing, and by parties I mean Theranos and Safeway, of course, at the time that you started the discussions, were you contemplating sort of a similar model to what Theranos had been discussing with Walgreens, which is to roll out with Theranos' TSPUs in Safeway stores?
At the time we started, yes.
Who were your primary contacts with from Safeway?
My primary contact was with Steve Bird.
Okay, and were any others involved besides Steve Bird?
He had a team that worked for him. I almost entirely interacted directly with him.
Okay, what about after Steve Bird left Safeway? Who did you interact with then?
And he was supported by...
And who was responsible for the Safeway relationship from Theranos? Was that you?
Until Steve Bird left, yes, and then Sonny once Steve left.
So Sonny Balwani was responsible for the Safeway relationship after Steve Bird left?
Yes.
Would he keep you apprised of how the relationship was going and his discussions with Safeway once he took over responsibility?
In general, yes, but after Steve left, we didn't have the same kind of frequency of interactions with them.
So what happened after Steve left?
I believe that there was a fund that acquired them, and I think he was working with that fund to get their thinking about what and whether they wanted to proceed with this vision of the services in the pharmacy space. And it's my memory that the fund really wanted to restart the relationship, and we had a lot of disagreements about that because we'd spent so much time working with Steve over the past years and investing in technologies at sort of his request that we didn't want to restart it from scratch.
So then what happened after those discussions? Did Theranos ever end up rolling out its services in Safeway stores?
No.
Why not?
We couldn't agree on a model to do that. And ultimately, by the time we did agree, it was after the Wall Street Journal articles, and we were dealing with the issues in our clinical lab with CMS.
I'm handing to you what's been marked Theranos Exhibit 223. Exhibit 223 purports to be
No, that was previously marked as 186.
The calendar
So-
was.
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so I'm handing to you what's been marked as Theranos Exhibit 223, and Exhibit 223 purports to be a June 28th, 2013 email to Elizabeth Holmes and Sonny Balwani. Subject line is Safeway Theranos meeting 6/26/13 with Bates number TS-00340026. And there's an attachment that starts at Bates ending 34016. Have you seen Exhibit 223 before?
I don't know.
And again, this is your email address. Do you have any reason to believe that you didn't receive this email? So you can see in the parent email is attaching some notes from a meeting that you had. And he's asking you to make any suggested revisions that are necessary to make this an accurate summary of our discussions. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay, and then he's attaching some notes that he took, or a summary of the meeting that took place on June 26, 2013. Do you recall this meeting?
I don't specifically, but I know we were engaging with him around this time.
Okay. So, under central lab model in the summary, he writes, contrary to impressions that some Safeway people have, there is no technological problem with the devices and no plan to go without the devices in the stores. Theranos has determined that the use of the central lab model provides the quickest and easiest way to expand geographically. The central lab contains the advice. In fact, the device is the only way of obtaining results from the nanotuners. Do you see that?
I do.
Did you make this comment during the meeting?
I don't know.
Do you know if Sonny made this comment during the meeting?
I don't.
So when writing and referring to devices, do you understand him to be referring to the TSPU?
Certainly in the context of the statement devices in the stores, yes.
Okay. Well, he uses devices throughout, so you understand that devices here would be, if he's talking about placing devices in the stores, he could only be talking about the TSPU, right?
So as we discussed previously, there was a version of the TSPU that could process 6 samples at a time that we were designing for Safeway. So I'm assuming that's what he's talking about in the context of the device in store.
Okay. So when you said that Theranos has determined that the use of the central lab model provides the quickest and easiest way to expand geographically, was this the reason why Theranos was looking to change the model so that devices wouldn't be put in stores, but that samples would be sent to Theranos' lab?
Can you repeat that question for me?
Was this the reason why Theranos was proposing to change the business model from putting the devices in store to having samples taken at stores and sent to Theranos' lab?
What the reason?
The reason that is writing in these notes, which is that it provides the quickest and easiest way to expand geographically.
At this point in time, it might have been. It wasn't what, I guess in a way, it was what drove the original decisions with Walgreens that had happened earlier. I'm not sure whether that's how we were thinking of it by mid-2013, but it might have been.
Did you say that it was or was not the reason why you switched to a central lab model for Walgreens?
Well, as we discussed, it was the result of a lot of engagement with both of our regulatory councils and sort of decisions about business model. In a way, it was because it was the quickest and easiest way to expand, but there were a lot of other factors that went into that.
Okay, so why don't we look at the next paragraph then? It says the reasons for starting with the central lab model are as follows, and you can read it for yourself, but it essentially describes a courier model and the fact that because Theranos would need to be offering a full array of lab tests, including esoteric tests, you would need a courier to come pick up samples anyway, and so if that's the case, why not start with the courier model? Do you see that?
I do.
Okay, so why didn't you tell during this meeting that it was the regulatory issues that were prompting this move to a central lab model?
I believe we had that conversation with them previously when we sent them our CLIA certificate and became a CLIA certified lab.
You believe that that was your conversation?
Yes, that's why we moved away from what was written in our contract and to being a central CLIA lab.
So then why are you telling him a different story during this meeting?
I don't read this as being different. We had become a CLIA lab, and we were talking here about the fact that from a business perspective, this was the fastest way to operationalize now. This is now mid-2013.
Okay. So when you say that the device is currently capable of performing the routine blood tests, 90% or more of the demand, is that a true statement?
So you keep prefacing these by saying when she says it, and I'm just not clear that you've established whether she's saying it, Sonny's saying, or somebody else.
Sure. So do you recall making a statement to that the TSPU is currently capable of performing the routine blood test 90% or more of the demand?
I don't.
Was that true? Could the TSPU perform 90% or more of demand, of the demand for tests?
We believed it could at that time, yes.
What do you mean by we believe they could?
This is a few months before we sent in a number of pre-submissions to the FDA trying to get a really broad range of tests into the pre-submission process. So we thought we had designed a system that was capable of doing that.
Did you ever tell that the TSPU, that Theranos had only validated 12 tests on the TSPU?
As we previously discussed, at this time, no tests were live in the CLIA lab. The CLIA lab was not yet operational.
Okay. But this is June 2013, so Theranos would have been preparing for the launch in Walgreens, correct?
Yes.
So you were preparing to, or either had or were in the process of validating those tests, correct?
You know, I actually don't know if we'd started our LDT validations by then. My memory is that they started after this.
Okay. So did you tell or anyone at Safeway that Theranos had not validated any of its tests on the TSPU at this time frame, June 2013?
I don't know if we said those words. I believe he was aware at that point that the CLIA lab was not live and that no tests were live in the CLIA lab yet.
But that's a different question, right? I was asking whether he was aware that Theranos had not yet validated any tests on the TSPU.
I don't know exactly what he was thinking. I know that we were very clear that the lab was not yet operational. It was my assumption that it would therefore be clear that no tests were live.
So you never told him that Theranos had not validated tests on the TSPU yet by this time frame?
I don't know.
What does currently capable mean to you?
I'm just reading the rest of the paragraph to try to get the context. I think that this is in reference to the fact that was still focused, and Safeway was still focused on taking the devices through the FDA to get the CLIA waiver to be able to place them in the stores, and that we were saying that the technology that we had, we believed was capable of going through that process of getting the FDA clearance and CLIA waiver for these tests that would cover the majority of the testing pattern, which would have been a subset of the tests we ultimately operationalized in the CLIA lab based on our understanding of ordering at the time.
That's your understanding of what currently capable refers to in this paragraph?
Yes.
Why don't we change tapes?
This concludes media number 1 of Elizabeth Holmes. We're off the record at 11:13.